Alright, what is going on UTM26s? How y'all doing today? And welcome back to another post-com video. So today, I want to talk about something that I've actually made a video on previously, but I feel has now become an even more necessary point of conversation. It's something the Splatoon community has been talking about a decent amount lately, and that is banning in Splatoon 2, and more specifically, banning map and mode combinations. So, assuming I get this video edited, rendered, and exported, and then uploaded on time, Clan Blitz will be coming out in a few hours. Now, what this means is that the Splatoon 2 map list will be expanding from 13 maps with 3 game modes to 13 maps with 4 game modes, effectively adding another 13 maps to the rotation and expanding the total map and game mode combinations from 39 to 52. Now, this isn't an issue for solo queue, right? It's like solo queue, you're getting on, you're playing. It's not a big deal that if there's a bunch of maps to know how to play, because you're just there to have fun and you're there to play. Solo queue is in no way a representation of competitive Splatoon, but what is a representation of competitive Splatoon is competitive scrims, tournaments, and leagues, right? So what I'm proposing is that the competitive Splatoon community should come together and create a competitive map list. Now, whenever I see this topic brought up, it's always countered, or whenever someone, proposes that we should really take the time to create a competitive map, it's always countered with, there's no reason to do it. Teams should be comfortable playing all maps, and if they're bad at one, that's their fault. And while I agree that teams should be good at playing all the maps, why are we forcing ourselves to play bad maps? And now you can say, well, there's no bad maps in Splatoon 2. That is so wrong that it's not even worth getting into. There are bad maps, and there can be different types of bad maps. To me, and I sort of break this down into two categories when I think about it. There are bad maps because of bad design, and there are bad maps because of the way the game plays. Where if you took out something, it wouldn't necessarily be a bad map. For an example of that is Port Mackerel. It's so easy to abuse Stingray on that map that it has sort of become very just repetitive, and teams are just running 2 or 3 Stingray weapons and just grinding them, and then you just use them, cover the entire map, and teams can't really do anything because you can see people through walls and then shoot them. The other type of bad map, being a map that is just poorly designed, Black Belly, which coincidentally is the map you're seeing now, even though its tower control isn't bad, its Rainmaker is horrendous. And it's so easy to see that it's a bad map. The things I look for when looking at a map that was poorly designed are if you can see the developers panicking when they made it. Now, if you look at Black Belly Rainmaker, comparing it to Black Belly Splat Zones and Black Belly Tower Control, there's one glaring difference. There is a giant, massive wall sitting on both teams' plat. And this makes, what you can see here is that the developers didn't know how to make this map competitive, or the developers were looking for a way to make this map more balanced, couldn't think of a way to do it, and said, oh well, we're sort of screwed, we need to get this done, let's just throw a giant wall so teams can't run up the middle of the map as easily. Another place I see this is on Moray Tower zones, because you can see that when they were trying to adjust the map from Splatoon 1 to Splatoon 2, they knew that the splat zones played very stally, and teams would sort of just camp and wait for picks, and you could often win the game with only a few seconds of captured zone time. And so what they did in Splatoon 2 is they moved the zones to the middle. But what you see when they move the zones to the middle is that they're in places that make no sense. If you were to show me a picture, or show anyone a picture of Moray Towers, and be like, okay, there's 2 zones on this map somewhere, and obviously, they understand what that means. Point to the places where you think they should be. No one in their right mind is going to choose, the entrance to Sneaky as the place for those maps. It makes no conceivable sense. And so to sit here and say that we should be playing these maps that are poorly designed, are easily abused, and really just don't make any sense in terms of creating a fair and balanced game in a mode, in being the competitive side of Splatoon, that is supposed to bring out the most heightened competition and provide the most equal and balanced gameplay makes no sense. Now, along with there maybe being maps that are already not well suited to be played competitively, having such a large map list also creates scenarios, very often actually, where the map that is being played for, let's say, a series in a tournament, will have a greater impact on the outcome of that tournament. Now, to allow you to picture or get a better understanding of what I'm trying to point out, let's say in the winners bracket finals of X tournament, you have Team Olive versus Set to Destroy X. Now we're going to map 5 of a best of 5. The series has been incredibly close. Each game has been decided in overtime. In the final, it goes down to a Rainmaker. Now let's say Olive is incredible and never loses on Inkblot Rainmaker, whereas Set to Destroy never loses on Sturgeon Shipyard Rainmaker. And what does the 5th map happen to be? Oh, it's Sturgeon Shipyard Rainmaker. STDX wins. Now this comes back to the counterpoint that you'll see all the time to this argument, is that, well, Olive should have been more practiced on Sturgeon Shipyard Rainmaker. Like, it's their fault that they weren't as good as STDX. And yes, that is absolutely true. But that is going to be the case no matter what. Teams are going to have maps they prefer to play and that they're going to be better at. But what happens is when you have such a large map pool as we currently have in Splatoon 2, and it's only going to get bigger because we already know there's another 3 maps that are in the pipeline, you increase the chance that a random map will decide a series even between 2 very even teams. Right? And now this is, like, obviously, again, as I said earlier, this is always going to be the case. Teams are going to be better at certain maps. But when you condense this map list, teams are going to have more practice on this set map list, on the smaller set of map lists, and have more time to develop really strong strategies so that both teams are going to be so that a random map choice will have a lower chance to decide which team wins the series, as opposed to just the team that plays better and executes their strategy better. Now, another reason that I've never understood why the competitive Splatoon community has been so hesitant to adopt a competitive map list is because it's done in almost all other major esports. I mean, just off the top of my head, I can think of Call of Duty, Counter-Strike, Gears of War. They all have developed competitive map lists that they allow, or at least for the most part, they allow community input on to develop what players think will be the best competitive map lists. Now, I've already addressed why I think having a competitive map list will help grow the competitive Splatoon scene. I talked about that in the first video I made talking about this back in Splatoon 1. That's linked in the description if you want to hear my point about that. Ultimately, what do I think should be done? I think the best way to do this is to obviously have the community vote on it. Now, I believe this should not be the whole community. And the reason for that is that, like, let's say they were just to take everyone in Squid Coliseum, they put out a poll, and they were like, hey, everybody vote on this. Not everybody in Squid Coliseum is part of the competitive scene. You have people who only play solo queue or twins or quads like that, and that is not the competitive scene. The competitive scene are the teams that are on every night, scrimming, playing in tournaments, practicing to try and get better at this game. And those are the people who this map list ultimately affects. Thus, they should be the people voting on it. How to decide this map, or this, not map list, the teams that get to vote on this, I don't know the best way to do that. Ludi doesn't work because there are a bunch of teams that don't play in Ludi. I don't know what the best way to do it is, but I do believe that it should be the teams voting on it. As to who should be, like, organizing and conducting it, that's another question that I don't have the answer for. But I do think that as a community we need to come together and figure this out, because currently our map list is kind of a mess. One quick thing I want to touch on that doesn't really relate to this, but it does fall under the topic of banning, is the idea of banning weapons. And I just want to touch on this really quickly in case anyone came here looking to talk about that. And thus, here's my opinion on it. I think banning weapons in Splatoon 2 is incredibly difficult because you're not banning just the weapon, you're banning a kit. And so to say that the sloshing machine, for example, should be banned with auto bomb and stingray, I think it's very hard to say that because you're not just banning the weapon itself, but you're banning the whole kit. Yeah, but that's my my thoughts on weapon banning. But yeah, that's really all I have to say today. Let me know what you guys are thinking down in the comments below. Obviously, if you enjoyed, please remember to click that like button. And I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye!